So I want to welcome you to Sisters in Crime, Orange County. I'm Barbara DeMarco Barrett, the president of the Orange County chapter. And since the 80s, I guess it's the, 86, Lori, Sisters in Crime has been advocating for women crime rights. Yes, and 4,000 plus people, mostly in the US, some in England, members here and there, Australia, I think. You can learn more at sistersincrime.org or more about our chapter at sistersincrimeoc.com. And there you will find links to past recorded events. So we hope you'll join us. And next Saturday, there's a co-event with Sisters in Crime San Diego and New York with the two anthologies, Crossing Borders and Justice for All, Murder New York Style. You can find more information about that on Sisters in Crime Orange County's Facebook page, or go to the San Diego chapter's website, which is easily Googled now, our panel. And as we go on, please feel free to put questions in the chat. And as you know, as it comes up, we will ask them, and keep your microphone muted as well. Well, I'm so happy to have the three of you today. Your work is so different in so many ways, and so similar, of course, because it's all the crime genre. And Sara Gran's books have been published around the world and praised by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, and dozens of other publications. She's originally from Brooklyn, now lives in LA, where she writes for television and film. She's founder of Dreamland Books, which I very much want to talk about, and the author of The Book of the Most Precious Substance, as well as 7 previous novels, including Come Closer and the Claire DeWitt series. Naomi Hirahara is an Edgar Award-winning author of multiple traditional mystery series and noir short stories. Her Ma Sarai mysteries, which have been published in Japanese, Korean, and French, feature a Los Angeles gardener and a Hiroshima survivor who solves crimes. The 7th and final Ma Sarai mystery is Hiroshima Boy, which was nominated for an Edgar for Best Paperback Original. Her second Leilani Santiago Hawaii mystery, An Eternal Lay, is scheduled to be released this year. She's a former journalist with the Rafu Shimpo newspaper and has written numerous nonfiction history books and curated exhibitions. Her newest book, Clark and Division, is the focus of today's panel. And Lori Rader Day is the Edgar Award nominated and Anthony and Mary Higgins Clark Award winning author of Death at Greenway, The Lucky One, Under a Dark Sky, The Day I Died, Little Pretty Things, and The Black Hour. She lives in Chicago, where she is co-chair of the Mystery Readers Conference, Midwest Mystery Conference. And she was the 2020 National President of Sisters in Crime. So let's begin with each of you talking about your current novels and how they came about. Do you want to start, Sara?
Sure. My current book is called The Book of the Most Precious Substance. It is a thriller, sort of my first step into that slightly different genre than crime. And it is about a woman who goes off in search of a rare book, which, now that I say it out loud, is pretty much the topic of all of my books. This one is a different person in search of a rare book. It is a book about sex magic, and she helps it by finding the book, which is very valuable, and by performing the sex magic acts in the books, she will have a better life.
Lori.
Yeah, I don't want to follow the word sex magic ritual. I mean, that's a hard one.
I don't want to say them, so it's all.
I definitely want to read about them though. So my latest book is a little bit of a departure for me as well. Death at Greenway is my first, parentheses only, ever, who knows, historical mystery. It's a crime novel light because it's mostly about Agatha Christie's house during World War II, when children were evacuated out of the bombings out of London, and 10 children really stayed at Agatha Christie's house. So I heard that little fact and thought, I want to read that book, except nobody had written it. So I did eventually, and it was just out last year.
Nice. Naomi.
Well, I guess in keeping with this theme of us, each author doing something different, I wrote my first historical novel, although I've many of my previous novels are like cold case, something happened. It's contemporary, but it's linked to a crime that happened in the past. But with Clark and Division, this is purely a historical novel mystery. And it follows a Japanese American family, the Ito family. And it's also a story about sisters. So the Ito family from this area in Los Angeles called Atwater, we go with them to this World War II, to the Manzanar Detention Center. And then the older sister, Rose, is released early to Chicago. And and the younger sister, Aki, and it's told from her point of view, she and her parents follow only to discover something terrible has befallen Rose. So it's up to the younger sister, Aki, to discover what had, the truth and what had happened to her sister, as well as carry her parents through this chaotic period in their lives.
I was drawn to your novel because I've been interested in Manzanar. I think a long time ago, I read a book, Return to Manzanar by Jean Houston. Is that her name?
It's Farewell to Manzanar.
Farewell to Manzanar.
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting to read Clark and Division after Manzanar, a little bit during and after. Can you talk a little bit more about that, what you had to do, what sort of research you had to do, or, how did it go? How did it go when you had the idea and now you're going to write it?
I think with me, especially, this is my new venture into historicals, but I kind of have to start with the crime. And I had done a nonfiction book with a friend that we did it for the Manzanar National Historic Site that investigated just what you said, like what happened to people after they were released. So through that, I knew that, Chicago was the #1 destination. Before World War II, there were 400 Japanese Americans. By the mid-40s, there were 20,000. And the reasons why that was the central destination, because it was in the Midwest, and there was a lot of factories, ironically, defense factories that these people would work for. But I think what really made me think this could be an actual mystery or novel was when I came across a document, a report by a community group that was kind of decrying the juvenile delinquency that was happening among the people, because the first ones to come were the second generation. They were the average age was mid-20s. So you get a bunch of young people like who were, under barbed wire, living under barbed wire in barracks, and then you release them without adult supervision in one of the most notorious, Chicago, notorious cities in the US. And of course, trouble's going to ensue. So there were children being born out of wedlock. There was abortions, which were illegal at the time. There was a stick-up man and assorted other things. And I think it was that when I saw that, I was going, okay, this is the place for me, the mystery writer, to enter in and to kind of fill in the gaps, because no one historically was speaking directly to these kind of, wrongdoings or whatever people were acting out. And I thought, okay, this is where we as fiction writers kind of investigate the truth, of these people's humanities. So that's where I came in.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess, Lori, you're also writing Death at Greenway is also based on something that happened. And how do you merge fact and fiction? Like, how did you go about your book?
I went about it the worst possible way. I would not recommend in any realm of do not follow my example. So I had never done that kind of research before. I'm not really a research person. but I had this idea in my back pocket for years, and all of a sudden it became my like overnight it became like my next project. It got purchased in like the second book in my 2-book deal, and I'm like, what do you mean it's next? So I had done a little bit of research. I went to Greenway House is on the River Dart. It's a beautiful, it's not like an overly opulent home. It's not Downton Abbey, right? But it's a really comfortable country manor house on the hill over the River Dart near Dartmouth. The house of Agatha Christie's dreams, a house that she had visited when she was a child because her mother knew the people who lived there, that kind of thing. And it had been there for, forever. So I started by going there, and then I did a lot of research online through ancestry.com and sites like that, looking for who were the people who were actually on the grounds. It's amazing the sort of information that it's actually available. Who are the people who live there? Oh, look, there's Agatha Christie, Malone, living at Greenway House on the day when they took the census for the war. And then the people who lived, up and down the lane, and the people who worked on the estate. So I started there thinking, I'll just figure out, this little pile of facts that I can gather up, and then I'll start writing some fiction. Can't wait for that day, right? Can't wait for the fiction to start, except because it had never been researched. It had, these little piles of facts just kept gathering and gathering. I lived in ancestry.com for about 6 weeks before I finally was like, I just have to write a story. I need to write a story. I don't know what's happening here. But I appreciate Naomi saying like, oh, here's my entry. Here's where the fiction writer can enter, because for me, that was the 2 nurses. There was a group of children with, their chaperones who took them down to Agatha's house. Agatha was there briefly and then went to London, sort of famously went and worked as a apothecary's assistant during the war, while her husband was doing war work away. But there were 2 nurses, Agatha Christie said in her autobiography, 2 hospital nurses who helped with the children. And that was all that was ever known, and ever probably will be known, about those 2 characters. And so they were my door. They were where I could be like, okay, when I'm writing about them, fiction. And everything else can, the piles of facts could gather up.
And Sara as well, your novel you had to have done a lot of research, unless you have this just, great store of information about black magic and Manly P. Hall and Cowley and all these guys. I don't think I've seen their names in novels ever. Can you talk about how you went about your book with that sort of research?
For better or worse, I did kind of just have all those things in my head. And when you put it like that, I'm not sure it's something to be proud of. But yeah, I probably actually did less research for this book than any of my other books, because it was stuff that I had been interested in, rare books, occult stuff, magic. Magic people are hugely into books, and the whole world of sort of rare occult manuscripts is an interesting one. And then I wasn't based on a real thing. You guys both wrote books that were based on true historical events. And I'm not nearly intelligent enough or hardworking enough to do that. So I just made all the shit up, which I think is easier. I just made it up and had fun.
You weren't crazy enough to try it. That's the difference. You were very sane.
But they both sound like such great books, and now I'm dying to read them. But I had to do a little bit of research for some of the rare book stuff, but I had worked tangentially in that field. I was not, an exalted rare book dealer like the characters in this book are, but I had done some work selling used and rare books. I don't think I ever sold anything over, a couple $100 tops. And these are like multi-million-dollar books. But I was interested enough that I had known a little bit about it and gone to book fairs and seen some of these books up close and exhibits and book fairs and whatnot. So it was probably the easiest book I've ever written, because it was a straightforward plot, straightforward story, no going back and forth in time or having to do a lot of historical research or any of that. It was a bit of a vacation as sort of book writing goes.
How long did it take?
A couple years. All my books take a couple years, but I like to give myself a break so I can come back to the manuscript a couple months later and see, if I still like it, what's working, what's not working. And I have all these other projects I'm working on too, but probably less time, just like ass and chair writing time than any of my other books.
You know, fiction writers talk, I mean, have different points of view in terms of combining fact and fiction. Some feel that anything goes because it's fiction, and others feel that if it happened, you have to stay loyal to the fact. Where are you in all of that? How do you decide? I mean, is it what's good for the story, or are you beholden to the facts in writing anything based in history?
Is that for me or for
all of you? All
No,
of you.
yeah. You guys who wrote history should probably jump in.
I think for me, it's really dependent on the book. And I'll also include my non-historical, just regular contemporary books too, because for my like Masarai books, like the geography, I know, I purposely made this ramen house. It was in the valley, but I didn't make it on this particular street, and people were kind of calling me out, or going, I don't know, this one street doesn't go that far. And but I was saying in my imaginary Los Angeles, it does, and there's also reasons why you want to fictionalize geography, because you don't want people to think that that crime or that, character came from that place. And then I heard Attica Locke once say, when she writes about Houston, it's kind of like her father's Houston, like it's kind of nostalgia and other things are kind of meshed in there. And I think I kind of did that with my Masarai books. But with the Clarkin division, I will say that was more, I tried, it's kind of what Lori was saying too, that there's not much written about Japanese Americans in Chicago, after, during World War II. And so I kind of felt a responsibility that I did need to have some information. I mean, I won't say some information, most of it really based on historic fact, but because there was not, I just had the bare bones and skeletons, I still felt the liberation to kind of fill in those areas. So
I don't know what I was thinking. This is the theme of this book for me. It was a huge challenge. It was not my normal kind of book, the kind of book I like to read, obviously, but not necessarily the kind of book that I had written yet. And for some reason, I just got it in my head that I would have as much fact as I could find. And because there hadn't been very much, I thought, okay, this is manageable. And because I'm not a very good researcher, I mean, I'm not going to find, stuff. It's not going to be. And then I just kept finding stuff, right? I just kept finding things. And then I got a little obsessed. I think it's safe to say that I was trying to, if I was going to do it once, do it well, do it as well as I could. It occurs to me to tell you that I used bombing data, to figure out when bombs actually fell near and around the area where Greenway was. And then like, oh yeah, I can corroborate that with, and then have scenes where they're responding to the bombs. I mean, these things weren't necessary, but I also think, why not? What else was I going to write? I had to fill up some pages somehow, and I needed some drama. And there's a war going on, so yeah, I'm going to use some of what history gave me.
I tend to have the opposite problem, because when I write my detective novels and my other books that are more crime-based, I sometimes do get inspiration from true crime cases, but I don't want that to be revealed in the book, because then I would feel an obligation to do all the wonderful research that you guys have done. And especially with true crime, you want to really respect that was someone's life and, their family is reading. So it's the opposite problem of, oh, I read about this case I found really interesting. How can I take what I find interesting about it, but change all the details, which I think is the more fun and easier job. And like you intellectuals who did the smart stuff, I'm definitely coming out as the sort of a lowest achiever of this panel thus far, because I'm like, oh, let me take the real stuff and just take all the fun parts, leave all the real shit behind, make it easy on me.
Oh man. Well, what about your characters? Like, in each book, do you have characters that you especially relate to or empathize with? And particularly in the current novels, is there one character that just kept being the one, or does it shift? Does your, the way you feel about them shift depending on what they're up to?
I can start with this one. So I wrote the first draft, a very bad first draft, I need to tell you, of Death at Greenway before, well, I turned it in on, January 2020, if you can think back for a second, what we were all doing then. So I turned it in, and then, I got some notes back, and then lockdown occurred, and I knew pretty quickly that it was not going to be a couple weeks in the house. So I just decided I needed to just, hunker down and rewrite my book, which needed it. It just did. But I found that with the pandemic, with the lockdown, I suddenly understood my characters so much more, because they were in a sort of lockdown situation, and which was hard for me to write, hard for me to understand. And in one case, the main character, Bridie, as she is known in the book, is, she says early on, I don't have the Blitz spirit. And that's literally the thing I thought to myself in this room when I was trying to rewrite this book. I don't, people were making bread on Facebook and giving free concerts, and, they're being expansive and generous with the world and creating. And I am like, no, I don't want to, and I don't feel like it. And I don't know how to deal with this. And so I used that. So that was really, actually, as it turned out, helpful. I will never thank the pandemic for what it has given me, but the shifting thing is interesting. I think, that's what is fun about writing, I think, is when you're revising, maybe you're finding something new in a character that wasn't speaking to you last week, but suddenly is. That's my magic, Sara, Gran. That's my black magic.
It is magic. I do think that's a sort of a magic, when your characters kind of run away from you and get into their own place and surprise you. And I think that's part of the fun of what we do, is when you can be surprised by your own work.
I always wanted to write, so Nisei means second generation Japanese American. So that's basically like the World War II generation. So their parents are, came from Japan, were immigrants. And my mother is not Nisei, she was from Japan. So I wasn't raised by a Nisei woman, but many of my friends have been, and they are just an enigma. They've been an enigma to me. I worked at a Japanese American newspaper, and they're forever optimistic, no matter what terrible thing has befalling them, and it drives me crazy. And I did one short story for Megan Abbott for this early collection called Hell of a Woman, which was, it basically talked about a Nisei woman who got in an affair with a white guy, and she thinks that he killed her husband, so she ends up killing him and chopping him up in little bits and putting it in a suitcase and dumping him in the Pacific Ocean. But noir people love that, but I think the Nisei population, or they couldn't relate to it. So then I was thinking, I want to delve into this mindset, because I know there's trauma there, and I want to kind of pull it out. So this wasn't going to be a noir book. I knew that. I wanted to investigate this ordinary woman, who is in the shadow of her older sister. And, what her enemy is actually silence. Like, her family and the community, they're just trying to get out of what happened to them, being forced out of their homes, and now, losing everything, and now rebuilding. They don't want to think back on what happened to them. So Aki has to, but she's different, she doesn't think of herself as anomaly, but she really is. So, it's in fact kind of hard. It's hard, more challenging in some ways to go into head of something like that, a person like that, instead of someone who's deep, evil, or I mean, I think that's a more interesting ride. So how do you make an ordinary person interesting? So that was my challenge.
Sarah, what about your characters? Is there one?
I almost always write first person, and I think that is it leads to a more sort of kinship with that character who you're writing. I don't know how you could do it unless the character was in large part you to some degree. I don't see how you could do it otherwise if you just do like a first person narrative. And I think, and many smarter people than me have said this, that I think that, when you write a book, every character is yourself to some degree. Every character, even the super fucked up ones, there's something you can relate to in them, or you would not be able to write them well. Although I will say the exception to that, if there is a type or a specific person you are fascinated by the fact that you don't understand them, that can also be sort of good fodder. And maybe your writing can lead to some understanding of why they're so fucking awful. But yeah, I always feel kinship with my narrators. I don't think I could write a book unless I really felt that closeness and that similarity with them.
When you started writing, was it first person, or did you find your way there?
No, I always liked first person. I actually just wrote like a little novella over the summer that I'm not sure what I'm going to do with yet. And that's the only thing I've ever written in normal third person.
Normal third person. Sarah, first person is also normal. It is okay.
Yeah.
You think so?
What about you, Naomi? How did you choose the voice for this book?
I knew it had to be first person. And, I guess all of us have written multiple books and also short stories. And I really see that with each book, I'm kind of experimenting. It's like a relay race for me, at least. Like I'm thinking, I'm experimenting. So I'll write a short story, and that will kind of present the baton for the next experiment where I go a little deeper, and so on and so on. What's weird is for me, a male voice, because I wrote a male old man's voice for 7 books, So I've had to kind of claim my female, you could do psychoanalysis on me, but I had to kind of reclaim my female voice actually from writing a middle grade book, and I knew what I could bring to the story, because I think many people could write a story like Clark and Division, but it might come off more like a third person, kind of a little bit distant. Mm-hmm. And I felt what I could bring to it is an intimacy, and because I understand, how she thought, and that's what I could bring to the table. So yeah, so deciding to do it from first person was from the beginning.
How about you, Laura?
Well, so the book I wrote before Death at Greenway is called, let me think about it for a second. It was 2020, the lucky one. And it was my first third person novel, third person close. It's got 2 protagonists. And I remember making that decision because they were 2 women who were about the same age, had not unlike experiences growing, Midwestern women of about the same age. And I thought I was going to have trouble telling them apart, that I think the reader would have trouble telling them apart if they were in 2 first person, which I have also done, which is a lot of fun. The Black Hour was in dual first person. But I was also practicing because I knew by then that Death at Greenway was coming up next. And I am not a historian. Have I mentioned I hate research? I not hate it, I embraced it, but I wasn't sure that I could capture a 1940s English people, British voice. And so I thought this character, whoever this nurse, is going to have to be third person. And then the more research I did, the more of these characters I found, the more I wanted them all to have that same moment where they got to have a very close perspective. You know, you got to hang out kind of in that person's perspective for a while, including Agatha Christie, which her family's not a fan of me doing, but so what? So I have 8 point of view characters. 8. Again, insane. Most of the book is told by one character, Bridie, but various characters get a chance here and there. Some of them just once, just one chapter to tell their part of the story. And I really like that kind of thing. I mean, in some ways, I feel like it was a cop-out instead of trying to figure out how to tell the story, a complicated story from one person's perspective, which is a challenge. First person, you think, oh, that's easier. It is not, because that like continuous camera is a lot of responsibility. But it was just an experiment that went a little crazy. The book is long. I'm sure my editor was hoping that I would cut a few people, but I could not. I loved them all. I still do.
What did you have to go through with the Agatha Christie estate? Did you have to go through anything, any kind of permission? Or?
No, you can write about people, especially dead people.
Yeah, because you're not doing her characters.
Right.
I'm not getting anywhere near her characters. Even the ones that are in the public domain. No, thank you. Other people are doing that quite fine. But, and I would not have had her in the book at all, to be honest, because it wasn't about her. It was about this group of children. But with some research, I realized, oh, she would have been there. She rented the house to this group. She would have been there to receive them and, you know, set down some ground rules, and then she left. And so then the story could open up without her. But I probably would have even tried to avoid that, except in the research, I say that all the time, in the research, I found that she and her husband and a friend of theirs were at Greenway in the kitchen when war was announced. And so that scene became it was a necessary moment, I think. If they had not been at Greenway when war was announced, I don't know that she would have shown up in the book at all.
Interesting. Some questions have come in. Pat asks, did the pandemic influence their books? I know 2 are set in historic periods, so I don't mean in a literal sense, but did it figure in their books in any psychological sense?
Yeah, most definitely. And Lori kind of alluded to that lockdown.
Right.
And in, you know, in my book, because people are coming out of confinement and then suddenly being in a public place, you know, and with Aki, the younger sister, she's, you know, she doesn't know quite how to act, right, in this new place without, it's Chicago. It's not, you know, something that she's used to. She's not, you know, just walking down the street freely is a thrill for her. So I could relate to that, you know, because we were talking about the ins and outs of this whole pandemic. You know, there's times where we thought we could be more free, and we still, like, how do you see someone, you know, you're not quite sure, how do we, you know, conduct ourselves? So that was very, I could, you know, the situation of the pandemic was helpful in that regard. But for me, in terms of writing, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, it was very difficult. And I knew that even though it was the same thing, I was inside of my house, when, you know, the whole world's, you know, on fire out there. I mean, I just gave myself a break, and I knew that I couldn't produce as many words as usual, you know, so that was fine. And then there was also publishing, you know, like my book got delayed a couple times, and it turned out to be a good thing. But I also found that my mindset, I was so, you know, because we were thinking it'd be coming out in April or May, and then they were going to delay it. And I was a little disappointed, because I was thinking, oh, we're going to miss the LA Times Festival of Books. Oh, May is Asian Pacific here. You know, none of that mattered. But I was like, my mindset was still in the before times, right? So I had to get to a point where I had to just kind of let that all go.
For me, I would say not at all, really. I worked through the whole pandemic. I had all the fears, of course, that everyone else did, but I didn't. I actually ended up working more outside of my house during the pandemic because I was working on a TV show than I usually do.
Mm.
I prefer the pandemic lifestyle of staying home and writing, but I was out on set and running around and going to meetings and stuff the whole time safely. We have this whole system in Hollywood for testing multiple times a week and stuff. So no, but weirdly enough, right before the pandemic, I had lost a bunch of people in my family, and that played into the writing of the book. And sadly, now millions more have as well. But no, it was not a factor. Strangely enough, it did not affect my life on a personal day-to-day level all that much until recently, really.
Mhm.
Well, I mentioned that the story was, I mean, the character was absolutely affected by being in lockdown all of a sudden. But the work itself, I think it gave me a place to go that I didn't mind being. I was stuck in my house, and that's where I was, I didn't go anywhere for probably 3 months at least. And so it gave me a place to be that was pleasant. Greenway is a beautiful house in England. Why wouldn't I want to go there again? I had been there twice in real life by then. I stayed there for 3 nights. So I had, nice memories, and I could call upon those and rewrite the book, which it absolutely needed. And the thing is, if I had gone on with, things had just continued, I don't know that I would have had the chance to make the book what I hoped it would be. I was on deadline. I had turned it in, but then I had a book tour that I was supposed to be doing. And of course, that was all completely, I had to cancel it. I set it up and then I had to cancel it. But because it was completely empty calendar, I could go back in and make it what I hoped it would be. And I'm grateful for that in a way. Weirdly, strangely grateful for that, if nothing else.
A couple more questions came in, but as you were talking, I was thinking about endings. And I wonder if you could talk about the endings of your books and how they came. Did you know where you were headed when you began? Did you know what sort of note you wanted to end on? And I was thinking of the ending of your book, Sara, and how it was such an ironic ending.
Don't spoil it. I'm buying it.
I'm not going to say what it is, but I was thinking then of something that I think Robert McGee says in his story, his book Story, which is that ironic endings are the best.
Oh, good.
I don't know, but when I read your ending, I thought of that. Were you headed there? I mean, did you know how it was going to end?
I don't actually remember when I came up with the ending, but in general, what I do is I just kind of write for a while and see, is this going anywhere? Is this a thing? Is this going to be a book? And then if it seems like it is, then start deciding the goal to work towards. So I'll usually take some notes and mess around for a couple months and say, is this really something? Because I have about 1,000 books that I wrote 20 pages of and did not continue, over the years. And then once I do, then it's like, okay, pick the ending and hit the goal. You got to have that goal ahead of time. Or for me, of course, everyone's different. I have to, once I get seriously into writing the book, I have to have some idea where the ending is going, because you want to build towards that, or I want to build towards that. So about halfway through messing around with it, then I got serious. And I was like, it's got to have this specific tone for the ending for the book. Ironic is a good word. Thank you for that.
So what about those 20 pages, the millions of pages? Like what moves you to continue? What moved you to continue with the most precious substance?
I always have like a lot of ideas. Most of them are not good. Oh, thank you so much. I always have a lot of final version just came in just in time to make it to stores, literally just in time. I always have so many ideas and so many things I'm interested in, and I'm a bit hyperactive that way, and so I always have a bunch of things I want to write. I always have a bunch of things I'm interested in, and so I don't know if there's a book there or not until I start. I think other writers have a clear idea and they decide and they set out and they do it. No, Lori's like, not me. So, I need to give it a try, and then usually within about it's easy for me to sit down and do 20 pages on almost anything that I find interesting. And but then can I keep going with it? Is there a story there? Is there really something there that you can do for another 200 pages? And very often the answer is just no. Like, it's a cool idea, it's cool characters, but you have not developed the thing that you need to take it 200 pages further. But sometimes that thing comes years later. I had a book I started a couple years ago about the postal police. I found out about I was walking down a street in Brooklyn one day and I saw a postal police car, like, you know, with all the police car bells and whistles. It's like, well, that is interesting. And I did all this research. It is one of the oldest and most respected law enforcement agencies in America, and it has this really, really interesting history. And I started to write this very sort of surreal novel about it. And I couldn't come up with the thing to make it go, though. I came up with characters I really liked. I had this idea I really liked, a sort of imaginary city that I really liked, where it was taking place, and it just didn't work. So that was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And then just recently I had an idea. I was like, maybe it can work. Maybe I can. I'm still not sure, but maybe it can figure that out. So pray for me and my postal police novel.
I want to read that. So I hope
Thank you. Thank you.
Me too. Me too.
And I am relying on you guys to come and help me finish the fucking thing, because I'm still not quite there yet.
No, it's not.
I need your research skills, even though you said you hated them, Lori, and you named them. I need your guys.
What about endings, Lori?
Endings. I'm afraid I am one of the wandering people that Sara mentioned, the people who don't necessarily know where they're going. So I'm easily distracted. There's a lot of good TV out there, you guys. There are a lot of good books that I would like to read. There are things I would like to do that are not sitting at my computer all day trying to get, 2,000 words out. And so it has to be interesting for me. I started writing when I was working a full-time job, a really stressful, sort of high-level one. And I had no other time to write except my lunch hour, and which I didn't always get to take, as you might imagine. Remember lunch hours? Whatever. So I had to be something that I really had to be at, like I would turn down lunch, invitations from friends to go hang out with my fake friends. They had to be interesting fake friends. And interesting to me is I don't know what they're doing yet. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the mystery is. I don't know what the solution is. I'm going to write myself into this so deep and then dig myself out again. And that's what's interesting to me. I would love to be somebody who knew a little bit better where she was going, because part of my process is what I call the dark night of the soul, and it can last months. When I've buried myself neck deep, and then I have to try to get myself out. And those are some dark nights. Those are when you're like, oh, this book isn't actually not going to happen. This is not going to come together. But I've also heard a lot of people, like Mary Higgins Clark famously said at a BoucherCon event where I was, that's how she did it for every book.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, I mean, if Mary Higgins Clark can somehow sack up and do it anyway, then maybe it's not the weirdest thing to do. But it comes with harrowing moments. Let's just say that. Yes. Harrowing. Yeah.
What about you, Naomi?
Yeah, I usually don't know. I write more traditional mysteries, and I usually don't know who did it until maybe halfway through or getting close to 2/3. And then it's like, okay, now I know how this is going to fly. And I think that is helpful, because you don't want to lead people. I mean, the joy of reading like a traditional mystery is you're trying to figure out, who did it, and you don't want it to be too easy. And I think if you go into it in the beginning, like everybody's a possibility, then, I think you could, I'm finding out myself with following these characters. Well, does this person have what it takes to kill a person? No, I'm kind of walking beside them as I'm writing this too. So yeah, and I think that was the case with Clark and Division. I wasn't quite sure. I knew the assorted related crimes that be happening around Rose, but I wasn't quite sure of the exact thing that had happened until I was probably like at least halfway to 2/3 into the book. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Another question. Sarah had a project she was adapting with Del Toro. Is that still happening? It's an adaptation of someone else's novel, which is kind of interesting.
No, that has been dead for many years. That died a natural death. But it's funny because it's this really interesting book that I'm sure many of you know called The Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that seems like you, Lori, having
Yeah, I got the book. Yeah, I have it. It is this amazing woman in Chicago, this really interesting woman, very wealthy family, but her father said, if you get a job, I will cut you off. So she had that choice, and she made the choice to stay and not do that and marry the guy her father wanted. But then as soon as she died, she expressed the interest she had always had in criminology by making these dollhouse crime scenes for the police to use to study crimes, which were apparently not very useful. But she did also do other things that really helped, like her local police department and other sort of criminology endeavors. So he wanted to make an adaptation of that, and we wrote a bunch of scripts, and it didn't go anywhere. But funnily enough, about 2 years ago, someone called me, not knowing I had worked on it. And they're like, "We have this book to adapt," and I wish I could have done that one as well. I would have loved to adapt it all over again, but I was busy with other projects. Frances Glessner Lee.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes. Yeah, really interesting and a beautiful book with the photographs and everything too. Just lovely. Everyone.
The creepiest little dollhouses you've ever seen.
It's so fun, and the way the book is laid out and everything is it's just a really beautiful book.
And have either Naomi or Lori worked with Hollywood?
Oh no. No.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm in LA, there's always, filmmakers, that are right next to you. So one of my first Masa ride, we did a gallant attempt to make that into independent film, and it died, as most of these projects do.
They do, yeah.
Yeah, but I do have one of my short stories has been optioned, so we'll see what happens. And yeah, something maybe happening with Clark and Division, but as we all know, I mean, Sarah, you could speak the most to this experience since you're in the business, but I've seen so many colleagues, right? You get that option announcement and everyone's going, woo, woo. But now I realize that's just the first step. There's so many other hurdles. And everybody's saying, well, who's going to play the person? When is it coming out?
Yeah. I say it's not a real thing until you were on set shooting. And if you can make some money previous to that, God bless, and make all the money you can and take it and do whatever you want with it. But it is not actually a movie or a TV show until you are on set. That is when it is a real thing, shooting. And even then, there's no guarantees that it will go anywhere beyond that, but at least you're shooting something if you were there on set.
Okay, another question. Do you have characters try to take over a scene or argue with you? And if so, how do you handle them? Anyone?
I would say not really, no, because, well, if they do, I enjoy it. I'll put it like that, because the question was phrased like, how do you handle it? And for me, it's like, oh, exciting. This guy's got something to say. Let's hear from, Jonathan, the guy who works in the bakery. Apparently he's more interesting than I thought. So it's as Lori and Naomi were saying, that it's these people do sort of become real to you, and they do sort of step off the page to some degree and surprise you. So as Naomi was saying about the mystery, the murderer can be someone totally different than you yourself imagined when you started writing it. But for me, it's not a handle it. It's a, oh, thank God.
Thank God.
This guy, Jonathan the baker, came up with a good idea because I didn't. So thankfully.
Characters have kind of presented themselves like they have the wrong name, and like I can't do anything with them. And then suddenly I'll rename them and they kind of come to life. So that's been kind of interesting to me. Yeah.
I was trying to think back if this has ever happened. And I think I have to go back all the way to my first book. The Black Hour, I started it from a single perspective of a faculty member at a university, not based at all on the one I work for right now. who was shot by a student she didn't know, and then, undertakes an investigation as to why that happened to her. He kills himself, so she can't just ask him. But I got about 50 pages in and I was stuck. And I finally figured out it was because she was still injured. And she was, all my protagonists are very reluctant sleuths. They just, they're just regular people and they don't really want to do it. They're like me. They would call 911 and lock the doors, right? But because she was so injured and messed up, I didn't know what to do. So I looked around for what I had given myself, and I had given myself this one other character who wanders into the scene where she's trying to get to her office and she's taking the stairs because she's stubborn. And the student is to show the reader that she is nervous around students now. She's a professor who may not be able to teach because she's nervous around students. And so I'm like, well, I got this kid. Let's see what he has to say. And he took over half the book. Now that's not magic, but it is sort of sometimes a little bit magic, because I didn't place him there for any reason whatsoever except to show you this one thing. But that's what I had given myself to work with. So yeah.
And the opposite can happen too, because my first attempt at my Summer of the Bibachi, I had two main characters, and basically Mas, he was like the shining star, and he pushed the other person off the stage.
I love that. I'm a big fan.
But I had to, but I finished the book and rewrote it many times before that happened. Yeah.
Wow. Have you left Moss forever?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I feel good.
Yeah.
I feel real good. Yeah.
If I can ask a question, were you just tired of it, or was there something that made you feel like this is the time to end the series? It's time to go.
I aged him. So by the last book, he was 86.
Well,
and also the character is based on my late father. And, it was like, I wanted it to have the proper ending.
Yeah.
So I wanted it to end well.
Mm-hmm.
And, in our business, and maybe, you should talk about your publishing house, but like, especially if you're writing a series, a lot of times you can't control if it's more than 3 books and you have a 7-book series, a lot of times you're under the subject to your publisher, right? On how many books you can go. And I was just fearful of that. That particular series went through 3 publishers too. So I wanted it to end well. So I took the opportunity when I was with a small press. Okay, let's put a period on this. And I feel very good about it.
Yes, Sarah, tell us about Dreamland Books Los Angeles. Why did you start a publishing company? What happened?
I did start a publishing company. I did. Something I've always wanted to do, even when I was writing my first book over 20 years ago. I was like, do I just want to start my own company and do this with myself? Because I have always been interested in books and been interested in all the various sides of the business. And I am, it was just something I wanted to do. And then just basically the things that Naomi was just talking about, like making these decisions. I did not want my creative life to be impaired, and I wasn't making enough money for it to be like a super tough choice. I was not making multi-million-dollar like advances where there was something pushing me into sort of making any kind of artistic sacrifice for money. I'm sure then I would have just like sold right out and gone along with it. For the kind of money I make from writing books and then being asked to shut down a series, to accept that no one wants to publish this anymore, which didn't happen, but I think will probably happen eventually with my series that I write, would have if I had kept going with regular publishers. Mm-hmm. And not having that kind of control. One of my older books has been in and out of print for many years, and I would like my books to be consistently in print. That's important to me. And I'm unable to get the rights back because they always print just enough copies a couple times a year so that they can say it's in print. Mm-hmm. We all know it's not in print. I have gave up arguing with the random house of Simon's Penguins because there's better things to do in life. But the book is not fucking in print by any reasonable standard. And that's sort of those negative aspects of publishing. And there's a lot of wonderful positive aspects, and I've had a lot of positive experiences, but the negative aspects were sort of spoiling the experience for me in a lot of ways, honestly. So it was sort of the carrot of always wanting to do it wanting to learn more about design, about print. Oh, I ended up doing print on demand with this, with all the printing shortages and whatnot. I could not get a handle on how to make it happen otherwise. So there was the carrot of that and the stick of, despite having had some really wonderful experiences in publishing, having had some negative experiences as well. And just, I'm old and cranky and bossy, and I want to do what I want to do. I didn't want to hear from anyone, well, you need to go in a different direction with this book, or we're doing this kind of a cover, or we're going after this person for blurbs, even though I don't like them. I'm too ornery for that. I just kind of wanted to do it all myself. And as all of you know, you end up doing a lot yourself in publishing anyway. You write your own jacket copy, you chime in on all the design issues, you sort of end up copy editing your copy editor or fighting with your copy editor, both, because copy editors have lost their minds over the past 10 years. There are some wonderful ones out there who I love working with, but there are a few who have just gone off the rails. I thought it was just me, and then I heard this from so many other writers. They're like, no, the copy editor completely rewrote my book. So if you're doing all this work yourself anyway, to me, it's much more fun to be the boss if I'm doing all that work. I don't want to do all that work and then also have someone tell me it's not good enough or tell me they want, no, I'll just do it if I'm going to do it. So I've made huge mistakes and done a lot wrong, but I think it'll be in stores on time. And other than the fact that I am incapable of telling, thank you. I feel like I deserve that applause because I fucked up so much and somehow it's still getting to stores on time.
When is it out? When is it
February 8th,
Awesome.
so just a couple weeks. And luckily with everyone else in publishing having all these delays, not luckily, but luckily for me in a very selfish point of view, with so many other books being delayed, that if it is delayed anywhere, I look just the same as any other publisher. I can just blame it on COVID, even though it isn't exactly. It's like, oh, the printer's taking so long. It's not that I'm late with my proofs.
It's supply chain. You know what that's like.
It's on a container ship.
Yeah. They're on a container ship in between New York and LA. I don't know what happened. It's totally not my fault. They're stuck in the port of Kansas City. Yeah.
Okay. Another question came in. Do you ever love a title, but your publisher doesn't? And do you fight for that title? So Sara.
Yeah, I will just chime in and say one of many reasons. My last book, I had to switch publishers during the series as well, like Naomi did. And I write this series, the Claire DeWitt series, and I've been lucky that it's, it doesn't have the biggest fan base, but it does have a dedicated fan base. The people who like them like them. Okay.
Yep.
And I'm very fortunate, and I have just an amazing, not huge, but just amazing in terms of enthusiasm and kindness and wonderful audience for those books. And when I published the last one with Simon & Schuster, and they bought it as a book in the series, but each book does work. And I have this whole title scheme, Claire DeWitt, they wouldn't do it. Claire DeWitt and the Infinite Blacktop, they refused. I thought I would trust them. I thought we'll do it the way they were like, we're going to get you a whole new audience. So we don't want it. I said, okay, just call it the Infinite Blacktop. They failed to get me a whole new audience because they didn't tell anyone they were publishing it. They kept it a big secret. And yeah, I know they're very secretive about the books they publish over there. And they, but without that title, Claire DeWitt and the people who actually do like the series, few as they may be, did not know what it was and did not know it had come out, and it didn't come up when they searched for it. So huge bummer. My first book too, there was a bit of a title battle. I still don't like the title for that book. And I did not know as a first-time author that you can just put your foot down and say, no fucking way. Did not know that.
I mean, you can do it. It doesn't always work, right?
Yeah, it depends, I guess, on how your contract is structured or how you turned it in, or I don't know. I don't know because I never succeeded in doing it. Maybe someone out there could tell us.
I do think maybe debut authors they may hold back, like, wow, I'm having this opportunity to get published, so I can't, I shouldn't fight too hard. But I got together with a friend here in LA. She, and she's getting her mystery novel published for the first time. And she told me she just hated her title, and like, she can't even say it right,
Yeah.
And I said, you got to do something, and we were brainstorming other titles, and I go, I mean, that's going to stay with you. You have to fight, tell your agent, you just fight for it. And so she did, and they were able to get one that my friend was happier with. But I think it's definitely worth fighting. Some people really fight for the cover. but I think definitely the title needs to be something you're satisfied with. That's my opinion.
I
I've been,
agree.
and
The
I've been lucky. Yeah, go ahead.
Because you have to hold it's in your bio. It's, you have to hold it up. I'm also very partial to good, good covers. I want a good cover, but I've actually had to fight for a title that I could actually say with a straight face. And they wanted to name my third book, Run Away, Little Girl. A comma in it. So I was like, whoa, let me send you a list that might work better than that. But and then the cover is just, I feel like every book they put something out for you to react to that they might like. They'll say they love it because they love everything, right? But it's the best thing that's ever happened every single time. But it feels like to me like it's a conversation, like they're putting it out there and like, okay, you know the book pretty well, so let's gauge what happens here. Like we think this works, but sometimes it's like, what are you thinking? This doesn't work at all.
And no one knows what works.
No one
And
knows.
there is no science of publishing. There is no, other than like obviously offensive things. I once got in an argument with an editor because there was a bird. It's a beautiful cover. It's my favorite cover of all my books. And there's a bird on it, but originally the bird was upside down and dead. And I was like, a lot of people find dead birds very distasteful. I can tell you right now, it's going to be a problem. It's not something that offends me in particular, but for some people, that is a major sort of boundary crossing taboo to look at something with a dead bird on it. Yeah. But there's no science to it. So you might as well fight for something that you're happy with and you feel reflects your book.
And occasionally you get very lucky, right? I mean, Naomi, do you like your Clark and Division cover?
Oh yeah. And
you have it there?
Soho did a beautiful job and they gave me options. Oh yeah, there it is. I don't know if you can see it.
That's gorgeous.
Oh, that's really, really beautiful. And now that I see it, I'm like, oh, I've seen that many times. Yes, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy with Death at Greenway. This is the paperback.
Oh, beautiful.
There it is. Yeah, it looks like she's an angel. She is not. But
you know what? I should get a picture of you all holding your books.
Yes.
Okay, where the heck did it? I'm not. Oh, I got it.
Naomi, it's been. I know Naomi and I had to book out the same week, 2 weeks apart, something like that. So we've been.
I have it, but it has Post-its.
I'm doing this for a while now.
I know. I always think of that as like your graduating class, like the people you publish a book with at the same time, develop this kinship. Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. There was one more question. Which mystery writer do you think an aspiring writer should read, other than yourself?
Wow.
It really depends on what kind of book you're writing. Yeah. You know, we all have different styles. So, I think you should read the type of mystery book that you just gravitate towards, because it's, so subjective. But
and read widely. I mean, read crime, read not crime, read nonfiction, read all the stuff that you're interested in.
I wanted to ask you, of your own books, other than your most current book, do you have a favorite?
I love my first because it was so hard. It was like, took me 15 years. So whether or not it's the best, whatever, I still, I have fond feelings about it.
I think I like my Claire DeWitt books best. I think I like my detective novels. I think those are my favorites of all I've written.
I find that a very difficult question. I don't know. I did hear from somebody the other day that they still like my second book the best. And I'm like, that's could be insulting. I can't tell.
It's not.
It's great that so a reader will connect with a book and still feel that way years and years and years later. But to the person who writes the ones in between, you're like, well, why don't you like the new ones? We're babies. We're needy, greedy babies. And
I'm so neurotic. Yeah. Any compliment, I take it the opposite. Yeah.
My
most negative.
Was my second book that I wrote 20 years ago. And Come Closer. And I'm like, I'm glad people like it. It's really nice, but I wrote it 20 years ago.
Well, I think we're at the end of our time. I've kept you longer than I said I would, and I'm so glad you could be here. It's been such a fun panel. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank
Yeah.
everybody
much.
for being here with us too.